I remember the day Sarah asked for the divorce like it was yesterday. It wasn't the bombshell she thought it was going to be, though. She probably expected me to fall apart, to beg her to stay, but I'd been waiting for that moment for a long time. I'd seen the signs, watched her pull away from me piece by piece. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was going on. She didn't know I knew about Alex. She thought she'd been keeping it a secret, but I'm not an idiot. I'd caught wind of it about a year ago. One night, I came home early from work, wasn't even expecting her to be there, but I found her phone on the kitchen counter, face up. Usually, she was pretty careful with it. Too careful. But that night, the screen was just begging me to look. And I did. I scrolled through the texts and pictures. It didn't take long to confirm what I already suspected. The messages were filled with that fake sweetness, the kind of stuff people say when they don't think anyone is watching. But it was obvious. The innuendos, the constant talk of meeting up, the flirty emojis. She didn't even try to hide it. Not really. I didn't let on that I knew. Not immediately. I wanted to watch her, wait for her to slip up. And she did. Over the next few months, I saw the little signs, her staying out later, the constant "I'm busy" excuses. She even started dressing differently. It was like watching someone slowly push you out of their life, and all you can do is sit there, waiting for them to finish the job. But the thing is, I wasn't some passive guy, just letting her do whatever she wanted. I wasn't about to play the part of the clueless, heartbroken husband when I knew the truth. So I started making plans. Quietly. Methodically. I knew if I let her see how hurt I was, she'd have the upper hand. I had to keep calm, act like it didn't bother me at all. And when the day finally came, when she sat me down with that look on her face, the one that said she was about to give me some earth-shattering news, she didn't get the reaction she was hoping for. She was all nervous, wringing her hands, looking like she was ready for me to explode. "Liam," she said, her voice shaking, "I think we need to talk." I just looked at her, waiting for her to get it out. I think we should get a divorce," she said, biting her lip, clearly expecting some kind of emotional outburst. I wasn't angry, wasn't sad. I just nodded. "Okay," I said, letting the word hang in the air between us. "We can do that." Her face dropped. She wasn't ready for my response. I think she thought I'd start begging her to stay, pleading with her. But no. I had seen her. I had known what was going on, and I wasn't going to let her make a fool out of me. She blinked, probably wondering if I had heard her right. "You're not even going to fight for this?" she asked, voice rising with disbelief. I shook my head slowly. "No, I'm not. But I'll make sure you don't walk away from this with everything you want." That's when I saw the panic in her eyes. I wasn't giving her the reaction she had imagined. She had expected me to crumble, to beg her to stay, to say something to make her feel less guilty. But I wasn't doing that. I was done being a fool. "You don't get to have it all, Sarah," I said, standing up from the table and walking to the door. "You want a divorce? Fine. But you're going to pay for it." She sat there, stunned, not knowing what to say. But I knew exactly what I was going to do next. That night, I started getting to work. First thing on my list was closing all the joint accounts, canceling the credit cards. I wasn't going to let her get away with it, not without feeling some kind of consequences. Every little thing I did felt like a weight lifting off my chest, like I was finally taking control of the situation. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about making sure she realized the life she was about to walk into wasn't going to be so easy. The best part? She still didn't know that I knew about Alex. She didn't know I had been watching, waiting, and planning my next move. And by the time she figured it out, it would be too late. The days after Sarah dropped the divorce bomb were unsettling, but not in the way she probably imagined. There was no hysteria, no begging, no back-and-forth fight. Just silence. I could feel her discomfort, though. She didn't know what to make of me. She probably thought I was in shock, but in reality, I'd been planning this for months. She kept trying to talk to me, of course, always pretending like I was the one who didn't understand what was happening. Every time she'd approach me, I'd remain distant, not out of spite, but because I didn't need to play her game anymore. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into playing the victim. She had already been lying to me for over a year. Now, I was the one with control. I could see it in the way she tried to hold on to whatever little comfort she had left. She'd come into the living room with that concerned look on her face, trying to make small talk, asking about my day as if we were still a couple. As if I didn't know exactly what she'd been doing behind my back. I didn't answer most of her questions. I just nodded, offering as little as possible. I wasn't going to indulge her anymore. The house felt colder, emptier. I could feel the weight of the years we had spent together, the good and the bad, slipping away with each passing moment. But it wasn't the memories that were heavy. It was the way she had turned our lives into this twisted charade, pretending to be one thing while living another. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I was done. Not just with her, but with everything that came with her. Our shared life, the illusions of trust, the expectations. That whole life we had built was nothing more than a house of cards, waiting for the first gust of wind to blow it all down. And when it did, when everything came crashing down, I wasn't going to be the one left holding the pieces. By the time the divorce papers were ready, I wasn't looking for drama. I was looking for closure. I had already made the decision to tear everything down, brick by brick. I knew I had to be strategic about it. She had no idea that I'd been preparing for this for so long. I had been working with my lawyer for weeks, making sure I covered every angle, dotted every I. She had no idea what was coming. The legal paperwork was simple, straightforward, clear. It wasn't just a divorce, it included a restraining order as well. I wasn't going to let her have any more access to me, not emotionally, not financially, not physically. I needed her to understand that she couldn't walk away unscathed. When she finally got those papers, I could tell it hit her like a brick wall. Her face was pale when she read the words. She didn't argue or make a scene. She knew she couldn't. All the promises of working things out had faded the moment I stopped being her emotional punching bag. She had been the one who wanted out, but now she saw that the exit she thought was so simple was closing in on her. There was no easy way out anymore. I didn't take any pleasure in it. That's not what it was about. It was about making sure she couldn't just walk away, pretending like everything was fine. She needed to face the consequences of her actions, and I needed to make sure she didn't drag me down with her. What she didn't expect, though, was how quickly she'd start unraveling. Without me holding everything together, her world started to fall apart. And it wasn't just about the divorce. It was everything. The house, the bills, the lifestyle she had gotten so comfortable with. She wasn't prepared for the financial reality of being on her own. And she wasn't prepared for the emotional toll of having to face the truth. She started showing up at the house, more frantic than ever, demanding answers, trying to talk me into changing my mind, saying she was confused. But every time she did, it was like watching her dig herself deeper into the hole she'd already created. She thought if she played the innocent victim role long enough, I'd give in. But that wasn't going to happen. I had seen the real her, the one who had been lying to me, the one who had been sleeping with someone else for months while I just stood there, trying to make sense of the mess. I wasn't buying it. And yet, I couldn't help but feel a little bit of sympathy for her. Not that I was going to admit it. But I knew the truth. Once Alex was out of the picture, she'd have nothing. She'd be alone, stuck with the consequences of her own choices. And even though I didn't want her back, I knew she was about to experience something worse than the breakup. She was about to experience the fallout of thinking she could have it all without paying a price. In the meantime, I kept moving forward. Quietly, steadily. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was getting stronger. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was focused on the next step. I was focused on making sure the divorce was as clean and as final as possible. No more games. I wasn't even thinking about the future with Zoe yet, though I knew she was there, watching it all unfold. The truth is, I was just getting my bearings, taking back control, one step at a time. The weeks after Sarah received the divorce papers felt like living in a constant storm. She'd alternate between playing the victim and getting downright hostile. It was as if she couldn't make up her mind about how to handle the mess she had made. Sometimes, she'd try the "we can still fix this" act, acting all sweet and apologetic like she hadn't been sneaking around behind my back for a year. Other times, she'd lose her temper and throw things around the house, accusing me of everything under the sun. It was a weird dance of emotion, but none of it fazed me. I guess I should have expected it. I'd been in denial for so long, thinking that maybe, just maybe, things would work out. But this was a whole new level of clarity. The truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I didn't need to yell or shout to make her understand. She knew exactly what she'd done. It was all there, in black and white. And even though she tried to make me the villain in her story, I knew the truth. The real kicker, though, the thing that made me sit up and realize how far I'd fallen from the life I used to have, she wasn't sorry. Not even close. She wasn't sorry for cheating. She wasn't sorry for lying. No, she was sorry for getting caught. And she was scared. Scared of what life would look like without me footing the bills. scared of what it meant to lose everything she had built on my dime. She thought she could walk away from this and move in with Alex, but reality had started knocking on her door, and it wasn't as kind as she thought. The money, the house, the lifestyle, it was all slipping through her fingers. She wasn't prepared for it. Her little world of secret dates and flirtatious texts had come crashing down, and she didn't know how to handle it. She'd get upset when I'd casually mention things like, "I'll have the locks changed tomorrow," or "The utility bills are in my name, so we'll need to figure that out." It was like I was speaking a different language to her. She honestly thought she could keep it all, both Alex and the comfortable life I had provided, and get away with it without consequence. There was something deeply satisfying in that moment, watching her try to hold everything together while it slipped away. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I wasn't out for revenge. But I wasn't going to let her get away with treating me like a fool. She thought she could just waltz off into her new life, but the truth was, there was no new life for her. Alex was already showing signs of fading. He wasn't what she thought he was. He didn't have the stability I did, and the excitement of their affair was wearing thin. I could feel it in the way she avoided talking about him. She'd drop his name, sure, but she'd always do it in a way that sounded rehearsed, almost like she was trying to convince herself that it was all going to be okay. But it wasn't. And I knew it wasn't. It had been a year since I first found out about Alex, and by then, I had learned all the ways she'd been lying to me. The funny thing was, I wasn't even mad at him anymore. If anything, I pitied him. He was a pawn in her game too. Eventually, the emotional games she played got tiring. I'd come home to find things thrown around the house, mirrors cracked, pictures knocked off the wall. She'd been angry at the situation, and for a moment, I thought maybe she was starting to understand how far gone we were. But then, the next day, she'd act like everything was normal again, as if nothing happened. That's when I realized something. She wasn't going to change. She wasn't going to face the reality of her actions. She was going to keep trying to manipulate me until she got what she wanted. But that wasn't going to happen. Not anymore. I started documenting everything. Every mess she made. Every time she lashed out or threw something at the wall. Every time she tried to manipulate me with tears or guilt. It wasn't about getting her back or even making her feel guilty. It was about making sure when everything finally ended, she couldn't spin the story in her favor. I wasn't going to let her paint me as the bad guy, not when I was the one who'd been betrayed. Through all of this, there was one constant. Zoe. My assistant. She had been there through everything. She wasn't a part of the drama. She was just steady. Professional, yes, but there was something else. She didn't ask me about Sarah. She didn't offer pity. She just listened. And the more we worked together, the more I found myself looking forward to those moments. Zoe had a way of making me forget about all the mess I was dealing with at home. I never thought of her as more than a colleague at first. But as time passed, there was something comforting about her presence. It wasn't romantic at first. It couldn't be. I wasn't in a place to even think about dating, not with everything going on. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a part of me that started wondering if maybe she could help me move on from all this. Maybe there was something more there, something I could hold on to once the divorce was finalized. But for now, I had to stay focused. The end was near with Sarah. And when it was finally over, I wasn't going to look back. I wasn't sure when, but I knew I was done. Done with the lies. Done with the chaos. Done with her. The next few months would be hard, no doubt. But I could already feel the weight lifting. I was getting out. And when the dust settled, I was going to be free. It didn't take long for Sarah's act to unravel completely. The minute I had served her with the divorce papers and the restraining order, it felt like I'd set off some kind of domino effect. Her carefully constructed world was cracking at the seams, and she couldn't keep up the facade anymore. She'd been playing the victim for so long, but now, the reality of her situation hit her square in the face. And she was losing control. For the first few days after I handed her the papers, she kept calling, texting, trying to negotiate. "We can still work things out, Liam," she'd say, but it didn't matter anymore. The words didn't hit me the way they used to. It was like she wasn't even talking to the same person anymore. I wasn't the man who once wanted to save our marriage. I wasn't the guy who would have dropped everything for her. I had changed. I had seen the truth, and I wasn't going to go back into that cage. Sarah tried to keep up appearances. She'd go on about how I was ruining everything, how things could still be saved if I just gave her a chance. She even started talking about Alex like he was her knight in shining armor, like everything would be okay once she could move in with him. I could almost hear the desperation in her voice, but I didn't bite. I wasn't interested. I knew where that road led. Alex had been the exciting distraction, but he wasn't stable. He wasn't going to be there to pick up the pieces when everything came crashing down. But what hit me the hardest was when she started trashing the house. Not in some metaphorical sense, either. She was actually wrecking things. She kicked in the door to the master bedroom, broke a lamp, threw a bottle of wine across the living room. It was like watching a child throw a tantrum, but worse because it was coming from a woman who was supposed to be an adult, my wife, the person I had once trusted. She was unraveling before my eyes, and I knew I had to document it all. If she wanted to burn everything to the ground, I was going to make sure she couldn't deny it in court. So I took pictures of every shattered item, every hole she put in the walls, every piece of evidence that showed she wasn't as innocent as she liked to portray herself. It wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure she couldn't lie her way out of this. Meanwhile, the tension was building with Alex. I didn't need to see the text messages to know what was happening. He was already starting to pull away from her. I'd heard the rumors around the office, little whispers from people who knew more than they probably should have. Alex was looking for a way out. The excitement of their affair had faded. And as much as Sarah tried to pretend it wasn't true, I could tell she was starting to realize it too. I wasn't sure when it all clicked for her, but eventually, she realized she had nowhere left to turn. She wasn't getting the money, the house, or the stability she had been counting on. Alex wasn't going to bail her out, and the reality of her situation hit hard. She showed up at the house one night, different from the woman who had stormed out a few weeks earlier. This version of Sarah wasn't angry. She was quiet, almost apologetic in a way. But it was too late. I wasn't going to let her back in. Not in any way. The door had already closed, and I wasn't going to be the one to reopen it. I'd done what I had to do. I'd made sure the financial situation was under control. The joint accounts were closed, the credit cards canceled, and every asset that we shared was now mine. I'd ensured that Sarah had no financial leg to stand on. If she wanted to live the way she had, she'd have to do it without me. And then there was Zoe. It wasn't like I had started thinking about her romantically right away. But as I kept seeing her at work, as I kept talking to her about everything, about what was going on with Sarah, about the future, about all the uncertainty I was facing, I found myself looking forward to those moments. She was solid, reliable, and maybe more than anything, she didn't have any of the baggage that Sarah had dragged into my life. She was kind, but she wasn't here to rescue me, either. She wasn't trying to be anyone's savior. She was just there. And that mattered more than I realized. We didn't talk about the possibility of something more at first. We kept it professional, and for a while, I liked that. I wasn't sure I was ready for anything new. But when things started to wind down with Sarah, when the divorce papers were officially signed and the restraining order was in place, I found myself opening up to Zoe in ways I hadn't even realized I'd been closed off before. She became my sounding board, and that alone was more of a relief than I'd expected. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone who could just listen without trying to fix everything. As Sarah's life started falling apart, I could see it more clearly. She was no longer this woman who had the perfect life. This woman I had once loved and who had once been the center of my world. She had chosen Alex over me, and now she was facing the consequences. There was no clean slate for her. No happy ending. Her relationship with Alex fizzled out quicker than I thought it would. I wasn't surprised. But I knew she would be. Then, just as everything seemed to be settling down, something strange happened. Alex came back. It was a small thing at first, a text, a quick message, like he had been thinking about me. Thinking about what he had done. I didn't know what to expect, but I certainly didn't expect him to show up at my office, looking like a man who had been through the ringer. He handed me half of a lottery ticket. The one I had given him in a sarcastic gesture a while back, a parting gift when I figured everything was over. I had never thought it would be worth anything. But it had. It was a winning ticket, and he gave me half of it. No explanation, just the ticket. I just stared at him for a long moment, unsure of what to say. Alex was as much a part of Sarah's mess as she was, but there was something about that gesture that made me pause. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't even apologizing. It was just a symbol. Of regret, maybe. Of recognition that he had been as much a pawn in her game as I had been. It didn't matter, though. The divorce was finalized. I was free. And slowly, without realizing it, my life was starting to feel like mine again. The divorce was finally official. The papers were signed. The house was no longer mine and Sarah's, and the weight that had been pressing down on me for so long was gone. But the strange thing was, I didn't feel as relieved as I thought I would. There was a part of me that still couldn't shake the aftereffects of everything. I had gone through so much with Sarah, years of pretending to be happy, years of doubt and betrayal, and while I was done with her, the scars didn't fade overnight. I kept telling myself that the worst was behind me. The house was sold, the assets divided, and everything was legally settled. But I couldn't just flip a switch and forget about all that had happened. I spent weeks in a haze, trying to find a rhythm again, trying to figure out who I was without her. The silence in the house was deafening, and it was weird not having to second-guess every conversation I had. It was a strange form of freedom, one I wasn't used to. But through it all, I kept thinking about Zoe. We hadn't crossed that line yet. We hadn't even talked about where things were headed. But there was this quiet understanding between us that I couldn't ignore. Zoe had been a constant in my life for so long, even before all of this blew up. At first, I had just thought of her as someone who was there for me professionally, someone I could lean on during rough patches. But after everything with Sarah, Zoe had been more than that. She became someone I trusted, someone who genuinely cared, and someone I felt safe with. We started spending more time together outside of work. At first, it was simple things, grabbing coffee or lunch after meetings, talking about anything and everything. I never once felt like I was being rushed into anything, and I was grateful for that. Zoe never pushed me to open up or talk about Sarah. She respected my boundaries, but at the same time, I couldn't help but notice how easy it was to be around her. It wasn't love at first sight, not by a long shot, but it was something more meaningful. It felt like I was starting to breathe again. It felt like I was being seen for who I was, not as some husband who had been cheated on, not as the man Sarah had tried to control. I was me. Just me. Zoe and I never had to talk about what we were doing. It was clear. She knew I wasn't ready for a serious relationship. I wasn't sure I ever would be. But still, there was something comforting about her presence. It was like everything that had happened with Sarah had slowly started to fade into the background, and Zoe was helping me move forward. She was steady. She was kind. She was patient. All the things I had never gotten from Sarah. One night, after a long day at work, Zoe and I were sitting on a bench in the park just outside the office. The evening was warm, the kind of night that makes you forget the chaos of the world for a moment. We talked about work, about life, about how things were going with the aftermath of the divorce. I had never felt so comfortable talking to someone about everything I'd been through. The conversations with Zoe weren't full of pity or judgments. They were just real. Then, out of nowhere, she looked at me with those clear, steady eyes of hers and asked, "Do you ever think about starting over? Like, really starting over? Not just with work or everything else, but with your life. What's next?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't really thought about what was next in terms of my life. I had been so caught up in the anger, the betrayal, the financial battles, that I hadn't really allowed myself the space to think beyond it. But as I looked at Zoe, I realized she wasn't just talking about my career or the house. She was talking about me. About my future. About what kind of life I wanted to live from this point forward. I sat there for a moment, thinking about everything that had happened. About Sarah's lies, the pain I'd gone through, the way I had slowly started putting the pieces of my life back together. It wasn't easy. It wasn't instant. But it was happening. "I don't know," I finally said, a little surprised by my own honesty. "I think I'm just figuring that out now. But, yeah, maybe. Maybe I do." She smiled, like she knew exactly what I meant. We didn't need to say more. It was enough. A few weeks later, after a couple more lunches and coffee dates, Zoe and I finally crossed that line. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There was no grand declaration or deep, soul-searching talk. It just happened. And honestly, it felt natural. Zoe wasn't some grand escape from Sarah, or a quick fix to erase the pain of the past. She was just Zoe. And in a way, that was everything I needed right then. Things with Sarah were well and truly over. I didn't feel a need to hate her anymore. I didn't feel any anger or sadness when I thought about her. I had accepted the reality of what had happened. She had chosen her path, and I had chosen mine. I was in control now. But it wasn't just about moving on from Sarah. It was about finding something real again. It was about choosing to heal, choosing to live, and choosing to take back the parts of me that had been lost during those years of betrayal. It didn't happen overnight, but over time, I started to feel like myself again. And with Zoe by my side, I began to imagine a future I had almost given up on. The idea of a fresh start wasn't just some fantasy anymore. It was possible. I was starting to believe it. And then one day, after we'd been seeing each other for a little while, Zoe told me she was pregnant. Twins, actually. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel dread. I just felt excitement. It wasn't like I was ready for fatherhood or the responsibilities of a family. But there was something in the idea of it that felt like a second chance. A real one. This wasn't just about healing from the past. It was about starting a new chapter. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready. The news about Zoe and the twins hit me like a freight train. I wasn't prepared for it, but in a way, it was the best surprise I could have had. The idea of becoming a father again, becoming a father for the first time in a way that felt right, was surreal. I was in a relationship that didn't feel like a rebound. It didn't feel rushed. It felt like something solid. Something that had the potential to actually mean something in the long run. And now, with twins on the way, I realized that I was building a whole new life from the ground up. It's funny. After everything with Sarah, I had convinced myself that I was done with relationships. Done with love. Done with trust. I told myself that I wouldn't get wrapped up in someone again, that I was going to take care of myself and just focus on rebuilding my career, my mental space, my life in a way that didn't involve anyone else. I thought I could be fine on my own. And for a while I was. But with Zoe, everything was different. It wasn't about filling a void, it wasn't about finding someone to fix me, it was just us. And now, there was the promise of something bigger. I remember the first time she told me, her eyes wide with that little nervous smile, her hand resting on her stomach as if she couldn't quite believe it either. I had frozen for a moment, my mind scrambling to process the news, but as soon as I saw that look on her face, the same calm, reassuring look she always had, I knew everything was going to be okay. There was no rush, no pressure. We'd figure it out as we went along. But it wasn't easy, and I won't lie about that. We had to navigate a lot of new territory. There were the practical things. Doctor's appointments, setting up the nursery, figuring out how we were going to manage everything once the babies arrived. But more than that, it was about adjusting to the idea of what it meant for me to be a father again. To be a real father, not just a guy who occasionally showed up for dinner or birthday parties. I wasn't going to be a distant, uninvolved parent the way I'd been raised. I was going to be there. Fully. No excuses. The adjustment wasn't just on my part. Zoe had her own fears and insecurities about being a new mom. I wasn't the only one with baggage. She had her own past, her own story that she had to work through. But we worked through it together. Slowly, steadily. Zoe wasn't trying to be perfect, and neither was I. We were just two people who were trying to build something better than what we'd come from. And the strangest thing, I didn't think about Sarah at all. Sure, there were moments when the past would pop into my mind. A certain song on the radio would remind me of her. Or a memory from a vacation we had taken would flash through my head. But it wasn't a gut punch anymore. It was like looking at an old photograph. Distant, faded, part of a past that no longer held any real power over me. Sarah was no longer the central figure in my story. She was just there, a chapter 1 had closed. I had moved on. I think the real turning point came when Zoe and I moved in together. It wasn't a big, dramatic move, just a practical decision to combine our lives in a more permanent way. The house we found was cozy, quiet, and way more us than anything I had shared with Sarah. It felt like a home, not a place to exist. I hadn't realized how much I missed that feeling until I stepped through the door of our new place, the walls warm with the energy of possibility. Zoe had already made it feel like home before I even unpacked my stuff. The little touches, photos of us, framed invitations to places we had been, the way she'd arranged the living room to make it feel lived in, showed me that this was a place of love, not of surviving. And then, there was the moment that really sealed it. I was sitting in the living room one night, staring at my phone, just mindlessly scrolling through emails when Zoe came over, sat next to me, and placed her hand on my leg. It was one of those moments that just felt right, like the world slowed down just for a second. The twins were kicking that night, and she looked at me with this excited, quiet smile and said, "Do you feel that?" I nodded. I could feel them, little kicks pressing against her skin, and it made everything feel so real. I hadn't been sure I could ever trust myself enough to be a good father again. After everything with Sarah, I thought I had ruined any chance of getting that part of my life back. But in that moment, I felt this huge surge of hope. Not just for us, for the babies, but for myself, too. Maybe I wasn't the same guy I was a year ago. Maybe I wasn't the same guy I was before everything went down with Sarah. But I was becoming something better. The future was so different from what I had once imagined, but it felt right. This was it. This was where I was supposed to be. Things started moving fast after that. Doctor's visits became routine, and we started getting the nursery together. Zoe had her moments of doubt, of course, and I wasn't always sure how to reassure her. But we made it work. We always made it work. I was going to be there for her and for the babies. No matter what happened, this was going to be our family. And somehow, everything I thought I had lost, I found again. Not in the way I expected, and not without pain, but in a way that made me feel whole. The wreckage of my past wasn't going to define me. I was stronger than that. And I had Zoe and the twins to prove it. We didn't need a perfect, fairy tale ending. We had our own kind of love, our own kind of beginning. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about moving forward from it. And with Zoe and the twins, I was finally ready to do that. Life was changing, and I was starting to accept that. The twins were on their way. Zoe was already showing that calm, steady strength that would make her a great mother, and I was finally starting to feel like I was in control again. It wasn't perfect, and it was still a work in progress, but I was moving forward. Still, there were moments when everything felt like it was teetering on the edge. Like one wrong move could bring the weight of the past crashing back down on me. The memories of Sarah, her lies, the betrayal, it would always be a part of me. And there were times when I found myself thinking about how it all happened. How everything I thought I knew about my marriage turned out to be a damn illusion. It was easy to push those thoughts aside, but they always had a way of sneaking in when I wasn't expecting it. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with the images of Sarah's betrayal, the months of lies, the look in her eyes when I found out about Alex. Those moments still haunted me, like a shadow that never fully left. But what made it harder wasn't just the memories. It was the people who had stood by, watching it all unfold and doing nothing. Watching me fall apart and do nothing. Watching Sarah destroy me and say nothing. It wasn't just about Sarah and Alex anymore. It was about everyone else who had failed me. I remember when my brother, James, came by one afternoon after everything went down. He'd called a few times during the mess, but I had kept him at arm's length. I didn't want to hear his "everything will be okay" speeches. I didn't want to hear about how I needed to move on or get over it. But I knew he was worried. I knew he meant well, but that didn't make it easier. When he walked into my new place, it was clear he was still trying to figure me out. He'd never really understood Sarah, never liked her much, but he was always the kind of guy who tried to stay neutral, never taking sides, never pushing me to do anything I didn't want to do. But that day, he didn't pull any punches. "How are you doing, man?" he asked, his voice steady but unsure. I just shrugged. "I'm good. Really. Getting everything back on track." James didn't buy it. He took a seat, looking around the living room. "I've been hearing some things. You know, about Sarah. And Alex. People have been talking." That hit me like a slap in the face. I had expected it, but hearing it out loud was different. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I just focused on the coffee table, my mind going over the conversation I'd had with Sarah just a few months before. Her excuses. Her blaming me. The way she tried to paint Alex as some kind of victim, when the whole time she was the one who had torn everything apart. I was so damn tired of her version of things. "I don't care what people are saying," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "It's done. It's over." But James wasn't about to drop it that easily. He leaned forward, his voice quieter now, like he was trying to say something without making it worse. "I just want you to know that no matter what happens, I've got your back. Always." I almost laughed at that. Almost. Because in a way, I knew James was just trying to be a good brother. But where had he been when I needed someone to have my back the most? Where was he when Sarah was out doing God knows what with Alex, while I was sitting there trying to fix a marriage that was already broken? "I appreciate it," I said, swallowing my frustration. "But I'm fine now. I've got it all under control." He didn't push any further. Instead, we talked about work, about the twins, about anything that wasn't tied to the wreckage of my past. But I could feel it between us, the unspoken tension. It wasn't like he didn't care. It was just that he didn't get it. He didn't understand how deep this had cut, how much it had shaken everything I thought I knew about myself. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the feeling of being completely alone in the middle of it all. And then there was my best friend, Marcus. He'd been around during the early days of the divorce, but after the dust settled, I didn't hear much from him. I didn't expect him to choose sides. But the silence spoke volumes. It was like he didn't know how to talk to me anymore. Like he couldn't deal with the chaos I was living in. I finally reached out to him one night, after everything had settled down with the legal stuff, after I started to feel like I could breathe again. I hadn't heard from him in weeks, and I was sick of the distance. So, I called him. We met at a bar, just the two of us. Marcus ordered a beer, and I grabbed a whiskey, something to burn away the nerves. "Liam," he said, looking at me with that concerned look of his. "I know you've been through a lot. But, man, you don't have to do this alone." It was hard to swallow the lump in my throat. "I'm not alone," I said, my voice steady. "I've got Zoe. I've got the twins. And I've got myself. That's all I need." He nodded, though I could tell he didn't really understand. But it didn't matter. He wasn't the one who had to piece my life back together. I had to do it, and I was doing it. Slowly, sure. But I was getting there. But still, those moments of doubt crept in. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was truly as free as I thought I was. Was I really moving on, or was I just running away from everything that had happened? Was I building a new life, or was I just covering up the old one? The answer didn't come easy. But I wasn't the same man I was when I married Sarah. And I wasn't the same man who had found out about her affair. I had changed. I had rebuilt. Zoe and the twins, they were my new life. And every day, I was reminded that the past couldn't control me anymore. It couldn't keep me chained to the person I had been. I wasn't done with my healing, but I was getting closer to it. And that was enough for now. The months started to pass by, and life began to fall into a rhythm I hadn't even realized I needed. Zoe and I were moving through this new chapter, this new life, together. The twins were growing, their little kicks becoming more noticeable every day. The nursery was ready, all the baby clothes were folded, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was starting to believe that things could really work out. It was easy to think I had everything under control. I had finally let go of the anger towards Sarah, the resentment that had lingered long after the divorce. She was still out there somewhere, but I didn't care anymore. What I had with Zoe, this little family we were building, it felt more real than anything I'd had before. And I had stopped questioning it, stopped worrying about the what-ifs. For the first time in a long time, I was just living. But life, of course, has a funny way of surprising you. It was a Friday afternoon when the first twist came. I had just wrapped up a meeting at the office and was heading home, the usual mix of excitement and exhaustion filling me up as I thought about seeing Zoe. The twins were due in a couple of months, and I was already looking forward to the chaos and joy they would bring. There was so much hope in the air, I could almost touch it. I was halfway home when my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, and for a split second, I thought about ignoring it. But something made me pick up. "Hello," I said, wondering if it was a wrong number. "Liam." A voice, slightly nervous but familiar, came through the line. It was Alex. I froze. For a second, I thought I might have misheard him. But no, it was definitely him. "Yeah, this is Liam. What do you want?" I couldn't keep the coldness out of my voice. I hadn't heard from him since the day I confronted him, since the day I told him I knew what was going on between him and Sarah. I don't know if you're interested, but I need to give something back to you," Alex said, sounding unsure of himself. "I don't know if you remember, but a while ago, you gave me a lottery ticket. I won something on it, and I want to return it to you. I'm not asking for anything, just, I don't know, maybe some kind of peace offering." I could feel my heart rate pick up, though I tried to keep my voice steady. The lottery ticket. It had been one of the last things I'd done as a way of saying goodbye to everything that was Sarah and Alex. It was an almost sarcastic gesture, one last jab at their relationship, a way of showing that I didn't care about any of it. "I don't need anything from you," I said, keeping my voice as firm as I could. "You and Sarah destroyed everything. I don't want anything to do with you." There was a pause on the other end. And then, surprisingly, Alex spoke again. This time, his voice had softened. "Look, I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I can't go on just pretending like this never happened. I owe you. And if nothing else, I just wanted to return this. And maybe try to make things right in whatever way I can. I'm sorry." His apology wasn't much, but it was something. And I wasn't sure why, but it was enough to make me think for a moment. Was I supposed to just accept that? Should I be the bigger man? Should I act like none of this mattered and take the damn ticket? I almost told him to keep it, but then I stopped myself. There was something inside me, something deep down, that told me I needed to see this through. I needed to close the chapter. And if this was part of it, then so be it. Fine, I said, my voice harder now. Meet me at the coffee shop by my place. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When I hung up, I sat there for a second, staring at the phone. I didn't feel angry, but I wasn't exactly calm either. A weird mix of confusion and bitterness stirred in my chest. Here was Alex, of all people, trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. Trying to make up for something that wasn't going to bring back the time he and Sarah had stolen from me. It took me a little longer to get to the coffee shop than I expected, and when I walked in, I saw Alex already sitting at a table by the window. He was holding a crumpled lottery ticket in his hand. He didn't even try to look like he was doing okay. He looked like a man who had made a lot of mistakes and was still trying to figure out how to deal with them. I stood there for a second before walking over. I didn't sit down. I just stood, staring at him, waiting for him to speak first. I'm really sorry, Liam. I know it doesn't fix anything, and I know I don't have any right to ask for your forgiveness, but I just wanted to return this. I thought, maybe if I could give it back, it might help in some way. I didn't know what I was expecting from him, but this wasn't it. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to tell him exactly what I thought of him, to remind him that he had no business even showing his face after everything he'd done. But another part of me, some quieter part, understood. Understood that he was human too, that he was caught up in the wreckage of the same mess I had been in. I looked at the ticket in his hand. It was so small, so insignificant compared to everything else that had happened. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need his pity. But still, I held out my hand, just enough to take the ticket from him. You can keep your apology, I said, my voice steady. But I'll take the ticket. He handed it to me, and we didn't speak for a few moments after that. The silence was thick between us, but there was a strange sense of finality in it too. I had gotten what I needed, closure, however small it might have been. When I walked out of that coffee shop, I didn't feel better. I didn't feel worse. I just felt like I had crossed a bridge. And maybe it was just me, but that small gesture from Alex, the return of the lottery ticket, felt like it marked the end of a long chapter. It didn't undo anything, but it was the final page. It was over. I didn't tell Zoe about the encounter. I didn't need to. The only thing that mattered now was moving forward. With her. With the twins. With the life we were about to create together. The past was done. I wasn't going back to it. After meeting Alex at the coffee shop, things felt different. It wasn't an instant shift, but something subtle changed inside me. It was like I had cleared out another room in my mind, another part of the wreckage left by Sarah's betrayal. The ticket, the apology, it wasn't going to heal the scars, but it did something else. It reminded me that I had power. I wasn't just a victim of what happened anymore. I could make decisions, take control, and move on. Zoe and I had dinner that night, and as we sat down, the conversation turned to the usual things. Work, the twins, the nursery. But there was an ease to it that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if the air had cleared between us. We were both excited, nervous, and a little overwhelmed by the idea of what was coming, but we were in it together. And for once, I felt like I didn't have to carry everything on my shoulders alone. I was learning that with Zoe, I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to act like I had it all together, like everything was in place. She got that. She saw me for who I was, the mess I was, and still chose to be here. And that felt like the real thing. More than anything I had ever felt with Sarah. But even with all this new hope, the truth was that the past still lingered. It was there in the background, a quiet hum, like an old song you can't forget. And no matter how hard I tried to push it aside, it would show up, unexpectedly. One evening, a few weeks after Alex and I met, I got a call from my lawyer. I wasn't expecting anything important, just a routine update on the finalization of the divorce. But what I heard made my stomach drop. Apparently, Sarah had gone to court and filed a motion to contest some of the financial terms of our settlement. She was arguing that I'd been withholding assets during the divorce proceedings and was requesting a larger share of the property. The irony of it hit me instantly. Sarah was the one who had destroyed everything. She had the affair. She had lied. She had left me alone to pick up the pieces, and now she was coming after me for more? I wasn't sure whether to laugh or throw my phone out the window. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I sat there, gripping the phone, trying to process what the hell I was supposed to do. Zoe could tell something was off when I got home. She knew me well enough by now to read me, even when I didn't say a word. I explained what happened, though I didn't go into the full details. There was no point in stressing her out with every tiny detail of Sarah's vindictive behavior. But still, the frustration bubbled up inside me. That woman really doesn't know when to quit, I muttered, pacing the kitchen. Zoe stood at the counter, arms crossed, watching me, but her voice was calm when she finally spoke. Liam, you're not going to let her get to you. You've already built something so much better than anything she can take from you. Don't let her drag you back into her mess. Not now, not ever again. Her words stuck with me, more than I'd expected. I was angry, sure, but what Zoe said made sense. Sarah's bitterness, her need to keep pushing, wasn't about me anymore. It was about her. She wanted to control the narrative. She wanted to hold on to whatever she could. But I wasn't the same person who had been broken by her lies. I wasn't going to let her dictate my life. Not anymore. So, I decided to handle it the way I always did, head-on, with calm determination. I called my lawyer back and gave them the go-ahead to fight her on the motion. I wasn't going to let her get away with this petty, vindictive stunt. If she wanted more of my life, she wasn't going to get it. Not while I was standing. As the days passed, the whole thing felt like just another reminder of how far Sarah had fallen from the woman I thought I knew. I used to think she was smart, even capable, but now? She seemed desperate. Lost. The affair hadn't just ruined our marriage, it had ruined her, too. She was no longer a person I even recognized. She was just a shadow of the woman I'd spent so many years with, clinging to a past that had long ago slipped through her fingers. Zoe was right. It wasn't my fight anymore. I wasn't going to let Sarah drag me back into her chaos. I was building something better, something that actually had a chance of lasting. And I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all her, take that away. The battle with Sarah over money dragged on for a few weeks, but in the end, the judge ruled in my favor. It felt almost anticlimactic, like it was inevitable, really. Sarah had nothing left to stand on, and the ruling was a simple formality. Her motion was denied. The case was closed. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had fully put the last piece of that chapter to rest. And yet, something strange lingered. A small feeling, like a knot in my chest, that refused to go away. I was free, I knew that. But there were still things I hadn't dealt with, things I hadn't fully acknowledged. I hadn't yet fully forgiven myself for staying in that marriage for as long as I did. I hadn't fully let go of the guilt I felt for being blind to Sarah's affair, for being too trusting, too naive. But I wasn't going to fix everything in one day. Life wasn't that neat. I was learning that healing took time, and time was something I had now. Time to build something real, with Zoe, with our family. The night after the court ruling, I went to bed early, Zoe curled up next to me, her hand resting lightly on my stomach. We didn't need to talk about everything that had happened in the past few months. We didn't need to dissect every decision, every fight, every moment. We were just there. Together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. I woke up that morning feeling lighter than I had in years. Maybe it was the weight of the legal battle finally behind me. Maybe it was the fact that Zoe was getting closer to the due date, and I could practically feel the excitement in the air. Whatever it was, I didn't have that gnawing, anxious feeling in the pit of my stomach. The past, Sarah, Alex, all the mess I had fought through, felt distant, almost like someone else's story. It wasn't a perfect life. Hell, it never would be. There were still bills to pay, work to keep up with, the regular challenges that come with life. But when I looked at Zoe, her eyes sparkling with that quiet excitement as we made plans for the twins, I couldn't help but feel like I had finally gotten to where I was supposed to be. Zoe and I didn't rush into everything. We were taking our time. We still had our separate lives. She had her career, I had mine, but the space between us had grown so much smaller over time. There was no pretending, no games. We were in this together, and there was no drama, no unresolved baggage dragging us down. Still, some days the past did creep in. It always will, I guess. There were moments when I would think about the wedding, the life Sarah and I built. Those memories, good and bad, would pop up unexpectedly. But instead of bitterness or anger, I just felt resigned. That part of my life was over, and I was thankful for the lessons it had taught me. But I wasn't going back. Zoe and I had our first doctor's appointment that afternoon. The excitement was palpable, but it was also overwhelming. The twins were doing well, and everything was progressing perfectly. When we heard their heartbeats for the first time, it felt like a promise. A promise that no matter how messed up things had been, this was real. This was the future I was building. I couldn't stop smiling the whole way home, my hand resting gently on Zoe's stomach, feeling the tiniest flutter of the twins inside her. It was surreal to think about how far we'd come in just a year. A year ago, I was stumbling through a divorce, fighting over a house, a car, a life I thought was mine. Now, I was about to be a father. And not just a father, a good father. The kind of father who shows up, who supports, who builds something better than what came before. But even with everything so perfect, I knew I wasn't done growing. I knew that healing wasn't some linear path. There would be more moments of doubt, more moments of frustration. I wasn't the perfect man, and neither was Zoe, but we were perfect for each other. And that was more than enough. The phone call from Sarah came a few weeks later. It wasn't unexpected, though I wasn't sure why she was calling. After everything, after the divorce, after everything that had happened, what could she possibly want from me? I answered, figuring it would be the usual. A complaint. A demand. Maybe a threat. But instead, her voice on the other end was different. Liam, she said, sounding almost defeated. I just wanted to apologize. I know it's too late for that, but I feel like I need to say it. I was wrong. I hurt you. I never should have done what I did. And I'm sorry. I don't expect anything from you. I just needed to say it. It wasn't the apology I'd expected. In fact, it felt almost too little, too late. But there was something in her tone, something raw, that made me pause for a second. For the first time in a long time, I realized I didn't need anything from her. I didn't need her approval, her forgiveness, or her apology. I thought about it for a second, the phone still pressed to my ear, and then I just spoke the truth. I appreciate you saying that, Sarah. I really do. But I've moved on. You can't fix what happened. You can't change the past. I've got a family now. That's where my focus is. And I'm happy. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I wasn't sure what she was thinking, but at that moment, I didn't care. I didn't need her to understand. I didn't need anything from her anymore. Well, she finally said, her voice shaky, I guess I should let you go. Take care of yourself, Liam. I will, I said, and it was the truth. I was taking care of myself. I was taking care of my future. And nothing was going to take that away from me. When I hung up, I didn't feel a sense of victory. It wasn't like some final, epic moment of triumph. It was just done. It was a chapter closed. I turned to Zoe as I set the phone down. She looked at me, knowing exactly what had just happened. There was no need for words. We both knew the significance of that call, and the fact that, for once, I had nothing left to prove. The twins were coming soon. Zoe and I were about to start our real family, our real life, and I was ready. Ready to be the man I knew I could be. Ready to be a father, a partner, a new version of myself. And this time, I wasn't looking back.